There comes a point in your life when words are no longer bridges, they become battles. You explain, you plead, you show your heart like an open wound, hoping they will finally understand. But they don't. And here's the truth no one tells you they never will. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes, silence is the highest form of strength. When someone consistently violates your peace, disrespects your boundaries, or manipulates your kindness, silence is not revenge, it's clarity. And cutting all contact is not cruelty. It's protection. We've been taught that being good means being available, that forgiveness must come with continued access, that love means we always stay. But that is not love. That is fear in a disguise. Fear of being alone. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of not being enough. And when we lie from that fear, we give away pieces of our soul, just to keep people who were never meant to stay. You are allowed to outgrow people. You are allowed to walk away from family members, friends, lovers, and colleagues who drain the life out of you. Not out of hate, but out of love, for yourself, for your peace, for the person you are becoming. This isn't about ghosting. This is about truth. It's about no longer participating in dysfunction. It's about finally realizing that the version of you who tolerated it all deserved better. And now, you're going to give her that. So don't explain anymore. Don't text one last time. Don't post a vague quote hoping they jagui live in a world where noise is celebrated, where having the last word feels like winning, and silence is mistaken for surrender. But silence, when chosen consciously, is one of the most powerful responses you can offer. It requires self-restraint, clarity, and above all, courage. Not everyone deserves your energy, your words, or your effort to explain. There is an immeasurable strength in recognizing when silence serves you more than speaking ever could. People often equate silence with defeat. They assume if you're quiet, you must have lost your ground, your confidence, or your voice. But what they don't see is the battle you fought internally to choose stillness over chaos, to not react when provoked, to stay grounded when your spirit is tempted to rise up in defense. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's profoundly active. It's the sound of a person choosing peace over performance, dignity over drama. When you choose silence, you're not avoiding the issue, you're mastering it. You're no longer giving power to situations or people who thrive on your emotional response. You're refusing to feed arguments, to be manipulated into defending yourself against distortions of your character. That's not weakness. That's emotional intelligence. That's strength that no applause can validate and no criticism can shake. There are moments when silence becomes the only language that speaks truth. It says, I see what you're doing, and I will not play your game. It says, my value isn't up for debate. Silence draws a boundary without building a wall. It commands respect without saying a word. It removes you from battles you never needed to fight, and it teaches others that access to you is earned, not assumed. Silence can also be an act of self-trust. You're saying to yourself, I don't need to convince them. I don't need them to understand. In that moment, you're standing firmly in your truth, even if it shakes. You're giving yourself permission to let go of the exhausting need to be heard in places where your voice has always been ignored. That's not giving up, it's leveling up, and perhaps most importantly, silence gives space for healing. The moment you stop reacting, you begin reflecting. You hear your own voice again, not theirs. You recognize your pain without letting it control you. You see things clearly. Silence doesn't mean you're doing nothing. It means you're doing the invisible, sacred work of listening to yourself. That's not silence as weakness. That's silence as sacred self-honor. Cutting contact is one of the hardest, most soul-wrenching decisions a person can make, not because it's impulsive or cruel, but because it's often the last resort of someone who has tried, again and again, to maintain peace with someone who only brings chaos. The world might not understand your choice. They might label you cold, heartless, or unforgiving. But the truth is, when you've reached that point, you're not acting out of hate. You're acting out of necessity. It's a line drawn not in anger, but in exhaustion. There is a misconception that cutting ties with someone means you wish them harm. But in reality, it often means you've simply stopped wishing for them to change. You've let go of the hope that they'll see the damage they've done, or suddenly become someone they're not willing to be. And when you let go of that hope, you begin to make room for something else, your own healing, your own safety, your own sanity. It's not vengeance, it's self-preservation. Many of us were raised to believe that walking away is abandonment, that love means staying, enduring, and absorbing pain in the name of loyalty. But love, real love, especially self-love, has boundaries. It has thresholds. It knows when enough has truly become too much. And when someone has repeatedly disrespected those boundaries, the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to step away. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough about yourself to stop bleeding. Cutting contact also doesn't always come with grand explanations or lengthy goodbyes. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to quietly walk away. Not every decision needs to be justified to others. The people who demand explanations are often the very ones who ignored every silent scream, every subtle plea, every small sign that you were struggling. Your decision to leave speaks more clearly than any words ever could. You don't cut contact because you're emotionally weak. You do it because you're emotionally done. Done with the gaslighting, the manipulation, the disrespect masked as tough love or joking around. Done with being the only one doing the work, carrying the emotional weight of a relationship that only drains you. Walking away is not quitting. It's choosing to no longer participate in a system where your pain is minimized and your worth is overlooked. And yes, there will be guilt. There will be second guessing. There will be moments when you wonder if you made the right choice. But every time you return to your silence and your space, you'll feel a little more whole, a little more free, a little more like yourself. Cutting contact is not an act of cruelty. It's a declaration. I will no longer shrink to fit someone else's comfort. I will no longer negotiate my peace. One of the hardest lessons we learn in life is that not everyone deserves a seat at our table. Not everyone is entitled to our presence, our time, or our energy, no matter how long we've known them, how close they once were, or how much we used to love them. The idea that we must remain accessible to everyone simply because of history is a trap that keeps us stuck in relationships that no longer honor who we are or who we're becoming. We often confuse longevity with loyalty. Just because someone's been in your life for years doesn't mean they've earned the right to stay. Time doesn't equal trust. Repetition doesn't equal respect. Some people are only comfortable with an older version of you, the version who tolerated being overlooked, disrespected, or minimized. And the moment you start honoring your worth, they feel uncomfortable. Because your growth exposes their behavior. Access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. It's something people earn through consistency, care, and mutual respect. And it's okay, more than okay, to close the door on relationships that no longer reflect those values. You don't owe people unlimited access to your heart simply because they once held it. Just because someone used to show up for you doesn't mean they still do. People change, so do dynamics, and your boundaries must evolve accordingly. Part of emotional maturity is recognizing the difference between being kind and being available. You can be kind and still choose not to answer that call. You can be compassionate and still unfollow, mute, or block someone who triggers your anxiety. You don't have to justify your decision to guard your peace. Your energy is sacred. It's your responsibility to protect it from those who only show up when it benefits them. The truth is, some people only want access to you so they can continue disrupting your progress. They don't want you healed, confident, or at peace. They want you dependent, confused, and small. When you recognize that, the choice becomes clear. You either keep letting them in and continue feeling drained, or you close the gate and reclaim your emotional space. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable. Growth always does. But the discomfort of protecting your peace is nothing compared to the exhaustion of constantly defending it. You are not a revolving door for people who only remember your worth when it's convenient. You are a whole person, not a backup plan, not a second choice, not an emotional sponge. When you finally internalize that truth, your standards will rise, and your circle will shrink, and that's a beautiful thing. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. People confuse it with reconciliation, as if letting go of anger means you must invite the person back into your life. But forgiveness and continued contact are not the same. Forgiveness is something you do within your own heart. For your healing, for your peace. It's not a sign that the relationship must be restored. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is forgive someone quietly and still walk away. Letting go of resentment doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean pretending the pain wasn't real. Forgiveness is not about minimizing the harm. They may have deeply wounded you. They may have betrayed your trust, lied to you, emotionally drained you, or broken you down piece by piece. Forgiveness isn't saying that what they did was okay. It's saying, I refuse to let this pain control my future. You forgive so you can breathe again, not so they can return. We often carry guilt when we forgive someone but still choose distance. We worry that we're being harsh, that maybe we're not truly forgiving if we don't offer them another chance. But the truth is, boundaries are not the opposite of forgiveness. They are its companion. You can release the bitterness, release the story, release the tension in your chest, and still block the number. Forgiveness is inner work. Contact is a relational choice. Some people will never be safe for your nervous system. They may apologize, they may show temporary remorse. But if being around them triggers anxiety, fear, or old wounds, you have every right to love them from afar. Forgiveness doesn't require proximity. It doesn't mean meeting them for coffee, replying to their messages, or reopening emotional doors that nearly destroyed you. Sometimes forgiveness means quietly closing the book and never rereading that chapter again. Forgiveness is the way you free yourself. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person suffers, but opening your door to someone who hurt you again and again. That's not forgiveness. That's self-abandonment. You can acknowledge your pain, honor the lessons, bless the experience for what it taught you, and still decide, I don't need to walk with you anymore. That decision is not mean-spirited. It's sacred self-respect. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for that choice. You don't need to justify why you're keeping your distance after forgiving someone. Healing isn't a performance. You forgive for you, not to prove anything to them. If they truly cared, they wouldn't ask for access. They would honor your space. And if they don't, that's all the clarity you need. Forgiveness isn't always a reunion. Sometimes it's a release. We're often taught that love means saying, yes, that kindness means being agreeable, that being a good person means being available. But one of the most powerful forms of self-love is saying no, not out of spite or selfishness, but out of deep, sacred awareness of your own needs. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about choosing what gets to come in. They are the lines you draw not to punish others, but to protect yourself. When you set a boundary, you're not creating division, you're creating definition. You're saying, this is where I end and you begin. That clarity is an act of love, not just for yourself, but for others too, because relationships that have no boundaries become messy, resentful, and unsustainable. Without boundaries, you begin to disappear in order to make space for everyone else. And when that happens, no matter how loved you are, you feel invisible. Boundaries teach people how to treat you. They communicate what's okay and what's not. And every time you honor a boundary, you reinforce your self-worth. You remind yourself, I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to protect my peace. I am allowed to choose myself without guilt. Boundaries are not walls that isolate. They are bridges that allow for connection with safety, respect, and understanding. Some people will push back against your boundaries, not because they are unreasonable, but because those people benefited from your lack of them. They were comfortable when you overgave, when you bent yourself into shapes that pleased them. So when you begin to stand tall, speak clearly, and protect your energy, they might label you selfish, distant, or changed. And they'd be right. You have changed. You've started valuing yourself. Learning to set boundaries is uncomfortable at first, especially if you're a people pleaser or someone who's spent a lifetime earning love through sacrifice. But as you practice, you'll begin to notice something beautiful: peace. You'll begin to feel more in control, more grounded, and more whole. You'll have more energy because you're no longer pouring into people or situations that leave you empty. That kind of peace is the reward of choosing self-respect over approval. And here's the most freeing truth: the people who truly care about you, the real ones, won't be offended by your boundaries. They'll honor them. They'll lean in and say, thank you for telling me. Boundaries don't scare away love. They filter out those who can't handle it. And what remains is something rare: connection that doesn't require you to shrink. That is what self-love invites. That is what boundaries create. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from being deeply misunderstood, especially by those you hoped would understand you the most. You try to explain your feelings with care. You choose your words gently. You tell the truth, even when it shakes in your voice, and still, they twist your meaning, dismiss your pain, or respond with indifference. The deeper pain isn't just what they say, it's what they refuse to hear. It's the willful act of closing their heart to your humanity. Some people don't misunderstand you because they can't. They misunderstand you because they won't. They've already decided who you are. They've locked you into a version of yourself that suits their comfort, their narrative, or their control. When someone benefits from distorting your truth, whether consciously or unconsciously, no amount of honesty will reach them. They will hear what confirms their bias. They will filter your clarity through their own denial. We waste precious emotional energy trying to be understood by people who have already made up their minds. We think if we just explain one more time in a calmer way, with better words, maybe they'll finally see us. But here's the truth. Being seen is not something you should have to fight for. Being understood shouldn't cost you your dignity. You don't have to keep shrinking your truth to fit someone else's limitations. When someone is committed to misunderstanding you, they won't hear your pain. They'll hear blame. They won't see your boundaries. They'll see offense. They won't notice your vulnerability. They'll weaponize it. You cannot heal in spaces where your wounds are ignored or made worse. You cannot grow with people who punish your honesty and reward your silence. Staying in those dynamics isn't love, it's self-abandonment. At some point, you must realize that clarity is not something you owe to everyone. You deserve to express yourself in places where your voice doesn't have to fight to be honored. You deserve to be met with curiosity, not criticism. With presence, not defensiveness. When someone loves and respects you, they will lean in when you speak, not lean away. They will want to understand. They will make room for your truth, even if it makes them uncomfortable. And so, if someone keeps misunderstanding you on purpose, walk away. Not because your voice doesn't matter, but because it matters too much to waste on people who've decided not to hear it. You are not responsible for making someone see what they refuse to look at. Let that go. Your truth will find a home where it is welcomed, not debated. We often associate leaving with failure. We're taught that to walk away is to quit, to give up, to stop fighting. But sometimes leaving is the most powerful act of survival. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's your body, your spirit, your entire nervous system telling you, this environment is no longer safe. And choosing to listen to that inner voice, instead of silencing it to keep others comfortable, is the beginning of healing. There is a kind of pain that becomes familiar, even when it hurts. Dysfunction can become your normal when you've stayed in it long enough. And so, leaving feels unnatural at first. It feels wrong even when it's right. But healing often starts in that very moment, the second you stop making excuses for someone else's behavior and start making space for your own emotional safety. Healing isn't always about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about removing yourself from what breaks you. You don't need permission to leave what wounds you. You don't need a perfect reason, a catastrophic event, or a moment of final betrayal to justify your departure. Often, it's not one big thing. It's the slow erosion of your peace, your confidence, your joy. It's the realization that you're constantly negotiating your worth just to be tolerated. Healing begins when you stop trying to be enough for people who refuse to see your value. Leaving is not running away from something. It's running toward something. Toward your voice, your freedom, your emotional clarity. You're choosing a life where you can breathe without apology. A life where you're not constantly analyzing every word, every expression, every mood. Wondering what you did wrong. When you leave, you begin to hear yourself again. And in that silence, something sacred starts to return your power. The hardest part about leaving isn't the act itself. It's grieving the version of you that stayed for so long. You may mourn the time you lost, the love you gave, the person you were when you entered that relationship or environment. And that grief is valid. But that mourning is also a bridge. It's what helps you cross from a past filled with compromise into a future anchored in wholeness. You don't need to rush it. Healing moves at the speed of self-compassion. And slowly, moment by moment, you begin to notice your nervous system softens. You wake up without dread. You speak without trembling. You stop walking on eggshells because there are no more explosions to fear. That is what leaving creates, not chaos but calm, not regret but rebirth. You begin to feel safe in your own skin again. You begin to return to yourself. There comes a moment when silence becomes your loudest statement. When you no longer chase, no longer explain, no longer argue, you simply choose to step back. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much about your peace to keep setting it on fire for the sake of being heard. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness. It is expression. A full-bodied, powerful declaration: I no longer owe you access to my presence. When you stop engaging, people begin to feel the absence of your energy. Your silence makes them sit with themselves in a way your words never could. The constant explaining, defending, and pleading, all of that gave them something to push against. But silence, it removes the arena entirely. It creates a mirror, and not everyone is ready to face what that reflection reveals. Sometimes, your withdrawal is the only thing loud enough to force a reckoning. You don't need to announce your departure for it to be felt. You don't need to craft the perfect final message or dramatic goodbye. Your silence becomes the closure they never gave you. It becomes the answer to the questions they refused to ask. And most importantly, it becomes the space where you can finally breathe again. When your silence speaks, it doesn't scream, it echoes. It echoes through the hollow spaces where love should have been, through the cracks where your boundaries were crossed. In silence, you begin to reclaim what was once handed over too easily: your energy, your time, your presence, your emotional availability. You start to realize how much power you gave away in trying to be understood. And as that awareness rises, you no longer need to prove anything. Your stillness says, I know who I am now, I know what I deserve, and I no longer need your validation to stand in that truth. Some people will interpret your silence as pettiness or immaturity. Let them. That's not your responsibility. People who are uncomfortable with your boundaries will always paint your peace as an attack. But silence doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you. It is your sanctuary, your shield, your sacred inner ground. It's where you retreat not to hide, but to protect your wholeness. To tend to the parts of you that were never meant to be constantly explained, defended, or debated. And as time passes, your silence starts to radiate a new kind of strength. People notice, not because you've made a scene, but because your absence carries weight, because your energy was never ordinary, because when you stop showing up where you're taken for granted, the atmosphere changes. Your silence doesn't just speak, it transforms. Not just them, you.